Gunpowder, as is known, was invented in China. There are versions according to which it was described as early as the 5th century. However, practical application of gunpowder came only several centuries later. Moreover, its creators never even thought that their invention would someday become a destructive weapon. Gunpowder was used in various celebrations for fireworks and other amusements. But, as they say, give a person something useful and necessary, and he will turn it into a bomb or some other crap. And so it continued until the invention was known in Europe. There, it quickly found a completely different application. Firearms were first used in the 100 Years' War, 1337-1453. However, at that time, they did not manage to displace swords, bows, spears, halberds, and axes. After all, the cannons that the English had were cumbersome, heavy, inconvenient to use, and, most importantly, ineffective. The first cannons consisted of a thick metal tube with a closed end, breech, and an open end, muzzle. The cannon was loaded from the muzzle first with gunpowder, and then with a projectile, a core. The powder was ignited by a torch or glowing coal through a small hole in the rear of the tube. The rapidly expanding gases from the exploding powder propelled the projectile out of the barrel. This basic principle of firearms operation still applies today. Due to impurities in the raw material, black powder produces a lot of flame and sparks when fired, as well as a large cloud of gray smoke. If you play computer games, you may have heard the term fog of war, which originated from the huge smoke clouds that used to hang over the battlefield. It took another half-century for this concept to be applied to individual handheld weapons. The first developments of handheld firearms, appearing around 1350, essentially were miniature cannons, intended to be held in hand or attached to a pole for use by individual soldiers. They were loaded and fired in the same way as full-size cannons. This weapon consisted of a cast barrel attached to the end of a pole. While the shooter held the pole under his armpit, he used a hot poker or torch to ignite the charge. Soon, the rather unsatisfactory effectiveness of handheld firearms was replaced by firearms with stocks. This wooden structure allowed the weapon to be relatively comfortably held and aimed better. Also, the ignition system was changed, around 1411, from a hot poker to a slow, burning match, held in a clamp attached to the side of the weapon. Several years later, a spring mechanism was added to this clamp. Now, the shooter could simply aim the gun and fire by pressing a button. Thus, the firing mechanism, the spring matchlock, was invented. The use of early arquebus and muskets required certain skills, especially for loading, and considerable courage because the metallurgy of the time produced steel with unstable characteristics. It often turned out that this weapon posed a greater danger to the shooter than to the target. The use of a match in firearms has many drawbacks. One of them is the ease of detecting the shooter. An enemy or animal could see the glowing match or even smell it. Partially solving this problem was the wheel lock, described by Leonardo da Vinci in his work, Codex Atlantico. By the way, this is the only invention of the creator that received relatively wide distribution during his lifetime. The principle of operation remotely resembles a modern lighter. A mechanism with a spring is attached to the side of the weapon. When released, the spring set a serrated wheel in motion. At this moment the trigger struck a piece of pyrite held against it. Sparks ignited the powder in the flash pan, which, in turn, ignited the main charge through a hole. The drawbacks of the wheel lock were its costliness, complexity of construction, insufficient quality of materials, and the need for careful maintenance. If the shooter lost the special key for winding the wheel's spring, the weapon became useless. These problems were solved by the flintlock, which was invented in Italy around 1547. However, it received its final form in France in 1610. The flintlock still used a pan filled with powder, priming, to ignite the main charge through a hole, but in it, the spark was struck by the flint hitting a steel plate. Around the end of the 15th century, an important discovery was made that changed the design of the barrel. German gunsmiths discovered that spiral grooves inside the barrel, rifling, caused the bullet to spin in flight, which provided much higher accuracy. New design barrels were expensive and difficult to manufacture, so their implementation was slow. Initially, they were only used for hunting, although by 1641, rifles had been issued to a small number of military units. During the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, small American units armed with rifled weapons easily outgunned English infantry from their rifled carbines, preventing them from getting within effective range of smoothbore muskets. When firing a flintlock weapon, there are two flashes. The first comes from the priming igniting in the flash pan. The second is the shot from the barrel. Hunting flintlock rifles fired a round bullet, or shot, at a relatively low velocity. Animals, such as ducks, deer, rabbits, etc., often startled at the first flash and had time to move so that the projectile missed. This greatly frustrated Scottish clergyman and amateur chemist Alexander Forsyth, so he decided to find a solution to the problem. He knew that some chemical compounds were so sensitive to impact that they ignited or exploded when struck with a hammer. Forsyth adapted them to ignite the powder charge and obtained a patent for his invention in 1807. The adoption of the percussion ignition system and the cap, around 1814, marked the beginning of what is often called a breakthrough in firearms technology. During this period, firearms remained muzzle-loaded, but the innovation simplified manufacturing, shooting, and maintenance to such an extent that large-scale production and a large market for firearms, both civilian and military, became possible. The development of the percussion cap unexpectedly made the revolver viable, and in 1836, Samuel Colt obtained several patents for a firearm in which the cylinder rotated to the next position when the hammer was cocked. The revolver he designed became the basis for all similar firearm models up to the present day. However, at that time, modern-type cartridges did not exist yet, and the chambers of the cylinder were directly loaded with powder and a bullet. Then a cap was placed on the nipple. By the beginning of the 19th century, it became clear that muzzle-loaded firearms with a percussion cap and, especially, with a flintlock, needed replacement because they did not provide sufficient rate of fire and reliability of shot production. The solution to the problem was the invention of the unitary cartridge, which combines a propellant charge, powder, an igniting element, primer, and a projectile, shot, bullet, or buckshot. The introduction of the unitary cartridge greatly simplified and accelerated the reloading of firearms. Paper unitary cartridges were a groundbreaking invention, but they had significant drawbacks. They easily became wet, and the casing could also be damaged if stored carelessly. These problems were solved by the famous American gunsmiths Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson. In 1857, they introduced the first unitary cartridge with a metallic case. It was designed for rimfire ignition and had a protruding rim. Later, in 1869, Edwin Martin patented the first centerfire cartridge with a separate primer in the center of the case base. Currently, cartridges of this design have displaced rimfire in all calibers except the smallest, like .22 LR. Overall, the 19th century provided a huge impulse for the development of handheld firearms. The invention of the unitary cartridge made it possible to transition from muzzle-loaded to breech-loaded designs. This innovation allowed for the creation of first magazine-fed, and later semi-automatic and automatic firearms. The widespread adoption of smokeless powder, in turn, paved the way for increased firepower and density of fire. The new composition allowed the barrel to not require cleaning after 10 to 15 shots, leading to the development of high-capacity magazines. Additionally, the shooter's position was no longer revealed by a dense cloud of smoke. An important factor in winning battles is the ability to release a large number of bullets in a very short time. Since the early development of firearms, high rates of fire have been a goal of designers. The first prototypes with multiple barrels firing simultaneously appeared as early as the 14th century. During the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War, multi-barrel weapons were used to support infantry. It was during this time that the precursor of the modern machine gun, the Gatling gun, appeared. It was a weapon in which automatic fire could be conducted using a hand-operated mechanism. The shooter rotated a handle similar to that of a meat grinder. At the same time, 6 barrels, arranged in a single block, rotated around a longitudinal axis. Of course, the Gatling gun was not a machine gun in the modern sense, as it required human involvement to function. The first true machine gun was developed by Hiram Maxim in 1884. It was a weapon that used recoil, rather than muscle power, to extract the spent cartridge case, feed a new cartridge from a cloth belt into the barrel, and fire a new shot. The first models used smoky gunpowder. During the trials, although the design functioned, a significant drawback became apparent: the excessive smoke and fouling of the mechanism. This made the use of the innovation in military service highly impractical. Only the introduction of smokeless powder cartridges breathed true life into machine guns as a new class of weaponry. During World War I, a new class of weaponry emerged, perfectly suited for trench warfare in confined spaces. It was the submachine gun, a fully automatic carbine with a stock, firing pistol cartridges. For 3 decades, this weapon became the second most important for infantrymen after the bolt-action rifle. Dozens of promising developments emerged in the interwar period. By the end of the 1930s, they had evolved into reliable mass-produced models of military weapons destined to clash on the battlefields of World War II. Today, almost everyone knows what a Soviet PPSH, German MP-40, or British Sten looks like. At present, the evolution of firearms is not at a standstill. Gunsmiths from different countries refine, modify, and improve upon the most popular existing models. Here are a few examples. The Kalashnikov rifle, also known as the AK-47, was designed by M.T. Kalashnikov in 1947. The AK and its modifications are the most widespread firearms in Third World countries. During World War II, Remington Arms produced weapons under contract for several Allied nations. In 1957, they released their 10 millionth rifle, the semi-automatic Premier model. UZI, a family of submachine guns produced by the Israeli conglomerate Israel Military Industries, IMI. The name Uzi was given in honor of the weapon's designer, Uziel Gal. The submachine gun famous famously wielded by Tony Montana in the movie Scarface. The UZI was first released in 1951, with more well-known variations such as the Mini and Micro.